Well, good morning, brethren. It's good, and also to those joined in by Zoom. It's great to be up with you all again here today. Now, last time I came up here, to Toowoomba, we explored the north and central part of Israel. Now, I mentioned that when I'd come back next time that I would cover southern Israel and Jordan, but it became apparent when I was preparing this that was going to be a little bit too ambitious. So today we're just going to explore southern Israel. And if I get the chance to speak again up here, I'll complete this mini-series on the Holy Land by covering Jerusalem and Jordan. So today we're going to explore 5 regions of southern Israel. Along the Mediterranean coast, we have the southern coastal plain that was in biblical times also referred to as Philistia, as this was where the Philistines lived before they were conquered and exiled by the Babylonians. Now, the Jews then more fully occupied this area after their return from Babylon. Now, moving inland, we come to the Judean foothills, or lowlands, known in Hebrew as the Shephelah, where much biblical history took place. Now, as we move further inland, we come to the Judean highlands. Now, Jerusalem lies within this part of Israel, and in between the Judean highlands and the Dead Sea is the much drier area known as the Judean wilderness. Now, further south of these 4 regions is the Negev, which is a Hebrew word that means both dry and south. Now, in modern times, the term has come to mean the area from around Beersheba and Arad all the way south to the Red Sea, where Eilat is on the Gulf of Aqaba. Now, along the southern coastal plain, the Philistines had 5 major cities that were allied together. Now, 3 of them were on the coast along the Via Maris, the international trade highway that connected Egypt with Mesopotamia. Now, those 3 coastal cities were Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gaza. Now, 2 of those 5 cities were on the inland road on the eastern side of the coastal plain, Ekron and Gath, where the giant Goliath came from. Now, from just north of Gaza on the coast to the border with Egypt is today's Gaza Strip. Now, another Philistine city that's mentioned in the Bible is Gerar, on the road between Gaza and Beersheba. Now, this was where both Abraham and Isaac dwelt for a time. Now, both of them deceived 2 kings of Gerar, both named Abimelech, and they made out that their wife was their sister. Now, Abraham had also done this previously with the Pharaoh when Sarah was 65 years old. Now, when he does it again here with Abimelech, would you believe that Sarah was actually 90 years old at the time? She must have been some woman to have that sort of an effect at that age. Now, in the Bible, Gaza is best remembered from the story of Samson. Now, Samson went all the way down to the Philistine city of Gaza to spend the night with a prostitute. Now, when the Philistines found out that Samson was in their city, they lied in wait to ambush and kill him. And Samson escaped Gaza by ripping off the city gate off its hinges and carrying it all the way from Gaza all the way up to Hebron. Now, Gaza is on the southern coast, and Hebron is 60 kilometres or 40 miles away up in the southern highlands. Now, you can see the route that he would have taken here in red on this map. Now, Gaza is at sea level on the coast, and Hebron is 1,000 metres or 3,000 feet above sea level. So his supernatural feat would be the equivalent of, say, picking up a 2-ton truck and carrying it all the way from, say, Ipswich all the way up here to Toowoomba. Now, Gaza was also where Samson was later imprisoned after losing his strength, and then after regaining it, a final time bringing down a pagan temple and killing himself in the process. Now, Gath is mentioned as the place where the giant Goliath came from. Now, we were quite impressed with the sheer size of Gath, which is known as Tel El Safi today. Now, the Tel was built on a large natural limestone hill. Now, it was situated inland on the eastern side of the coastal plain. Now, I really had to scratch my head when I saw it depicted as a port city on the coast in the recent TV series House of David. Now, it was here of all places that David fled from Saul, the very city that Goliath, who had killed, had come from. Now, the first time he tried that, he was unsuccessful. He was recognised, so he feigned madness and was able to get away in 1 Samuel 21. Now, the second time he was taken in by King Achish, who treated him well. At least that's how it seems to read in 1 Samuel 27. However, if you read the introduction of Psalm 56, it says the psalm was written when the Philistines captured him in Gath. So initially he was imprisoned before the king's heart was later somehow miraculously turned to favour David. Now, Goliath was 6 cubits and his span, which is 9 feet 9 inches tall, or 3 metres tall. He had a bronze helmet and a coat of bronze chainmail that was 5,000 shekels, or about 70 kilos in weight. His iron spearhead on the top of his spear was 600 shekels, or about 8 kilograms in weight. Now, there's some very interesting arrowheads in the Israel Museum, which archaeologist Joel Kramer points to as evidence of giants in Israel. Now, notice the giant one in the photo on the left compared to the small one next to it in the bottom right of that photo. Now, these here are made from bronze. We're told that Goliath's spearhead was made of iron. Now, the bottom right photo shows scales of bronze chainmail like that Goliath would have worn. Now, moving inland, we come to the Shephelah, or the Judean foothills or lowlands. Now, this is a transitional region of soft sloping rolling hills cut by valleys around 10 to 15 kilometres wide that lies between the Judean mountains and the coastal plain. Now, the length of the Shephelah from top to bottom is about 20 miles or 30 kilometres. So it only takes about half an hour to drive from the top to the bottom. Now, the Judean Shephelah consists of 5 valleys as well as the hills between them. Now, the road from Tel Aviv up to Joppa up to Jerusalem goes through the most northern of those 5 valleys, the Ajalon Valley, passing the ancient city of Giza. Now, the next valley down, the Sorek Valley, was guarded by Beth Shemesh, and it was the setting for the life of Samson. Now, the middle valley, the Valley of Elah, is most famous for the battle between David and Goliath. Now, along the next valley down, the Guvrim Valley, were the towns of Libnah, where we happened to participate in an archaeological dig for about 5 days, and Mareshah, where God gave Judah a victory over an army that numbered 1 million in the reign of King Asa. Now, Lachish at the southern end of the Shephelah is best known for the Assyrian siege against the city by the Assyrians. Now, in ancient times, Lachish was the largest city in the Shephelah. Today, however, the only modern town of any great size in the Shephelah is Beth Shemesh. Now, the Shephelah is a fairly sparsely settled region of Israel today, which is really quite surprising, considering that it's probably the most scenic area in southern Israel. In fact, it was my particular favourite, with its lovely green rolling hills and valleys. Now, here's a drone shot that I took of the Tel at Giza, which is on the southern edge of the Ayalon Valley, through which Highway 1 goes up from Tel Aviv up to Jerusalem. Now, Giza was originally a city of the Canaanites before passing to Israelite control, not during Joshua's conquest, but later in Solomon's time, thanks to the help of an Egyptian pharaoh who used it to help seal an alliance with Israel. Now, King Solomon built up Giza along with Hatzor and Megiddo. Now, all 3 of these cities are known to have 6-chambered city gates. Now, Giza is probably best known for its standing stones near its high place. Now, one of the early excavators, McAllister, wrote some of the gruesome finds that they found at this particular location. Now he wrote, all around the feet of the columns and over the area of the high place, the earth was discovered to be a regular cemetery in which the skeletons of infants were buried. These infants were never more than a week old. They were placed in small jars along with smaller jars with food, possibly for use in the other world. 2 of the skeletons showed marks of fire, end of quote. Now the top right photo here shows one of those jars with a buried infant inside. Now this horrific way by which the Canaanites worshipped the god Moloch was condemned by God in Deuteronomy 12. Now guarding the Sorek Valley was the town of Beth Shemesh. Now it was on the southern side of the valley opposite Zorah and on the road that went between the valleys of the Shephelah. Now Beth Shemesh is probably best known as the location where the Ark of the Covenant came to after the Philistines sent it back to Israel. Now the Philistine city of Ekron was just over the horizon on the left-hand side of this panoramic photo here that I took. Now my drone here was directly above the tell at Beth Shemesh. Now you can easily imagine the ark coming up that valley up to the fields here in front of Beth Shemesh. Now across the valley was the town of Zorah. Now Zorah was the town where Samson came from. And it was between Zorah and Eshtaol where Samson first discovered that he had a superpower of physical strength. Now I've noted down on the left-hand side there the location of Timnath, where Samson's wife came from, and close to that area is where he also killed the lion. Now 1 Samuel 6 tells us how God struck many thousands of people there at Beth Shemesh because they looked into the ark. Now I wonder just how much that scene might have looked like this scene at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now after that really bad experience, the men of Beth Shemesh then sent the ark up the road north to Kirjath Jearim. Now the next valley down, the middle of the 5 valleys of the Shephelah, is the valley of Elah. Now the Elah Valley is most famous for the battle between David and Goliath. And in 1 Samuel 17 verse 1 it says that the Philistines were gathered at Soko and were encamped between Soko and Azekah. Now Tel Soko is on the southern side of the valley at the bottom of this Google aerial view. Now Soko belonged to Judah, and it seemed that the Philistines wanted to capture it. And the Philistines had come in from the west or to the left of this map into the valley of Elah. Now to get to Soko, they would have passed the hilltop tell of Azekah shown on the top left of the map. Now verse 3 it says that the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side with the valley in between them. So we see here the Philistines are on the southern mountain ridge near Soko, while the Israelites are on the northern mountain ridge opposite of the Philistines. And in between was the valley and the Elah brook, from which David pulled out 5 smooth stones for the battle. Now on the right of this map, I've also noted the kibbutz where I stayed with the Robertsons and the Nelsons for a week when we participated in a dig at Tel Burna. So it was very cool to stay in this historic valley where David killed Goliath, and so very close to the actual spot where it occurred. Though I have to say I was disappointed that there wasn't so much as a plaque or a monument commemorating the battle. I mean, surely they could at least build a statue of David hitting Goliath with a slingshot. Now, to give you a better feel of what the valley looked like, here is some drone footage of the valley of Elah. So we're above Tel Azekah, looking southeast towards the valley. So that's where the 2 armies were camped. And now we're on the southern side of that valley at Tel Soko above it, and looking east towards the hills where Bethlehem is. That's where our kibbutz was. And the Israelites, well, they're probably a little bit more to the left, I would say. And there's the brook that ran in between the valley. And now we're swinging around back to where Azekah is. So the Philistines are on this side, and there's Tel Azekah. And now we're swinging around looking back east. So we're pretty much just above where the battle would have taken place. And now we're coming into where the brook is and the kibbutz where we stayed. Now here's a great photo of Jeff Robertson doing his best impersonation of Goliath, getting hit with a stone that he picked up from the brook. And while we're so close at the kibbutz we stayed at, we had to go exploring along the brook, which was dry at the time. However, we managed to find 5 smooth stones. Now, further southeast along the valley, we visited 2 candidates for the cave of Adullam, where David and his men hid from Saul. Now, one was on a hill west of Adullam, shown in the bottom left 2 photos. Sorry, the top left 2 photos. Now, the bottom left photo shows that there was even a wall in front of it, perhaps some part of a fortification. Now, the other on the top right was next to the town itself of Adullam, and there's quite a whole network of caves in this area that could easily accommodate lots and lots of people. Now, the next valley down from the Elah Valley is the Guvrin Valley. Now, there were 2 major towns that guarded the valley in Old Testament times. Now, one was Mareshah on the south side of the valley, and the other was Libnah, further to the northwest. Now, in the area of Mareshah, there are lots of these natural limestone caves, many of which have been carved and fashioned by those living in the area. Now, Mareshah was the scene of a mighty deliverance by God against an army of 1 million people. They came up against Judah during the reign of Rehoboam's grandson Asa in 2 Chronicles 14. Now just imagine an army of 1 million surrounding this place. Now God struck them in some sort of powerful way and they fled back south. And Asa's army pursued them as far as Gerar and defeated them there. Now 2 Chronicles 16:8 refers to the armies comprising both Cushites and Libyans. Now, this force was likely to have been a mercenary army of the Egyptians who often controlled both Ethiopia and Libya. Now, when it speaks of Zerah the Ethiopian, the word Ethiopian is translated from Cush, which could also mean southern Egypt, where many of the pharaohs were based at Thebes. Now, what likely appears to have precipitated this massive show of force with an army of 1 million men is that Asa probably revolted against the Egyptians' hegemony following Shishak's recent conquest and the annual tribute that Judah would have continually had to pay the Egyptians. Now, in this area, we also spent 5 days on a dig at Tel Burna, which is believed to be the biblical site of Libnah. Now, this is the view looking south back to Mareshah and Lachish further south. Now, here's the view looking north with the various structures that have been excavated so far on the Tel. Now, Libnah was conquered by Joshua and then allotted to the Levites. And Libnah also served as a Levitical city and it also revolted in the time of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat's wicked son Jehoram at the same time that the Philistines revolted because Jehoram was such a bad king. Now later in Judah's history we're told in the Bible that Hamatel, one of Josiah's wives, also came from here at Libnah. Now this was the beautiful sunrise at 5 a.m. on the first day of over Libnah on the dig, and all I could think of at the time was, what am I doing out of bed? Now here's a couple of creatures that were found on the first day of the dig. Now the one on the left there, which is a bit unclear, is a scorpion, and the one on the right is a chameleon. Now, while I found the archaeology interesting, the arduous manual labour of the dig was easily my least favourite thing of the whole trip, accompanied by the ridiculously early starts at 5 a.m. Now, it gave me a much better feel of what it would have been like to have been a slave in Egypt. Now, I don't think I'll ever participate in a dig ever again. I mean, hard work never killed anyone, but I'm not taking any chances. I did, however, find the largest piece of pottery, about yay big, half a large jar, but it wasn't of much use because we couldn't find any more of it. Now, Dale, though, had the best find at the dig. She found an iron arrowhead near the gate of the city. Now, there's a good chance that it may have even been lodged there at the time of when Sennacherib, king of Assyria, conquered Libnah around 700 BC. Now, the brutal siege of Sennacherib on Lachish is famously depicted in the Lachish release at the British Museum. Now, the bottom photo in the middle shows the remnant of the siege ramp that the Syrians built. Now, in Hezekiah's 14th year, Sennacherib conquered most of the cities of Judah, including Lachish. And Hezekiah bought him off with a tribute that's recorded on both the Taylor Prism in the British Museum as well as the Bible. Now, the top left photo here shows the remnant of the siege ramp the Assyrians built. The bottom left photo shows the six-chambered city gate of Lachish. And the photo on the right shows the royal palace that was at Lachish with its very thick walls. Now, we now come to the Judean highlands, which is where Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron and several other cities are located. Now, the mountains reach a height around about 1,000 metres near Hebron. And there's quite a lot of significant biblical towns in the tribal area of Benjamin, which is at the very north of the highlands there. Now, the ancient road that connects Jerusalem and Hebron with Bethel and Shechem in the Samaria region was known as the Ridge Route, or the Way of the Patriarchs. Now, at Hebron, the road forked with the Way of the Patriarchs going on southwest to Beersheba and continuing on to Egypt as the way to Shur. Now, splitting off a little east of Hebron, another road went from Hebron and continued onto Arad. Now, along that road to Arad was the wilderness of Ziph, where David fled from Saul, and Carmel and Moan from the story of Nabal and Abigail. Now, in the very north of the area of Benjamin was the city of Mizpah, which was a central gathering place during the Benjamin Civil War, and later when Samuel announced Saul as the first king over Israel. Now, south of Mizpah was Ramah, today's Al Ram, which was the home of the prophet Samuel. Now, Ramah was a very strategic location as it was on the crossroads of the road that came up from Joppa and went on to Jericho, and the north-south Way of the Patriarchs. Now, the bottom left photo here shows Samuel in a movie about David being played by Leonard Nimoy. Now, a little bit of trivia. Leonard Nimoy from Star Trek was Jewish, and his famous Vulcan salute is actually a rabbinical symbol for the letter Shin, which is the equivalent of our letter W. Now, the road from Ramah down to Jericho went through a pass between the towns of Geba and Michmash. A little further east of the road pass was the site of Jonathan's daring raid on the Philistines. Now, he climbed up one of the cliffs on the canyon there, and he and his armour bearer killed 20 men within a half acre of land at the top of the cliff. Now, west of Ramah is the city of Gibeon, where the road to Joppa, going down to the coast, split it at two different routes via Beth Horon and the other via Kirjath Jearim. Now, Gibeon is identified today with Al-Jib, about 10 kilometres northwest of Jerusalem. Now, after the destruction of Jericho and Ai, the Hivite people of Gibeon sent ambassadors to trick Joshua and the Israelites into making a treaty with them. Now, in response to the treaty, 5 cities led by Jerusalem attacked Gibeon, which Israel then defended and continued on destroying those 5 armies. Now, they pursued them down the Beth Horon Ridge amongst the miraculous circumstances of the deadly hailstones and the suspension of the movement of the sun and moon. So the daylight part of the day was extended by another 12 hours. Now, just south of Gibeon is a large prominent mountain called Nebi Samuel, which is a few miles northwest of Jerusalem. Now, it is likely to be the high place of Gibeon, spoken of in the Bible, where the tabernacle was during the reign of David and the early part of Solomon's reign, before the temple was built. Now, between Ramah and Jerusalem was Gibeah, which is about 5 kilometres north of Jerusalem. Now, Gibeah is best known as Saul's home capital and hometown and capital, where he was king. Now, it was also the site of the gang rape of the Levite's concubine that sparked off the Benjamin Civil War. Now, between the years of 1948 and 1967, Jordan occupied the West Bank, and King Hussein of Jordan began work on a royal palace on the ancient Tel here. Now, work stopped at the time of the 1967 Six-Day War, and the area became a part of Israel. Now, an outer shell is really the only thing that remains there of that building today. Now, the Ark of the Covenant spent several decades at Kirjath Jearim, west of Jerusalem, after it was returned to Beth Shemesh. Now, you can see here the hill at Kirjath Jearim, which appears to have been the hill where Abinadab lived, where a Catholic church commemorates the time of the Ark being there until David moved it. Now, it is actually the same distance from Jerusalem as the New Testament town of Emmaus, and recent archaeological discoveries there have led to the view that this was also the same place as Emmaus. Now, about 7 kilometres south of Jerusalem is the town of Bethlehem. Bethlehem, of course, was the town of Ruth and Boaz, and where King David came from. Now, Jesus said that he was the living bread, and the city he was born in here at Bethlehem fittingly means the house of bread. Now, the Church of the Nativity is in the centre of Bethlehem. Now, what is referred to as the fields of Boaz is on the eastern side of Bethlehem near the shepherd's fields. Now, Jesus and David were the direct descendants of Boaz, so if the fields of Boaz is where his family inheritance was, it is more likely that Jesus was born on the eastern side of Bethlehem. Now, one West Bank place we got to visit south of Jerusalem was Herod the Great's great fortress called the Herodion, which is about 5 kilometres southeast of Bethlehem. Now, it was originally built as a 7-storey structure with walls that stood high above a natural hill. Now, later, the external walls were hidden behind a landfill that was dug out from a nearby hill. Now, Herod literally moved a nearby hill and placed it on top of another to create it. Now, did Jesus perhaps have this feature in mind when he spoke about having faith as a mustard seed that could move a mountain? Now, there's a principle in Jewish teaching that called how much more, in the sense that if man can do this, then how much more can God do? So if Herod can move a mountain, then how much more can God do? Now, West Bank sites like Bethlehem, Mamre and Hebron are in Area A of the West Bank, which I'm hoping to get to next time I go to Israel. Now, Mamre here is believed to be a site that's about 4 kilometres north of Hebron. Now, the site today is called Ramat el Khalil, which literally means the heights of the friend of God. Now, it's got this large enclosure around it that was built by King Herod. And in the centre of the site is the remains of what many believe to be perhaps the site of an altar. Now, it was here at Mamre that where Abraham was visited by the Lord and 2 angels, where Abraham was told that he would have a son through Sarah, and later discuss the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, Hebron is generally believed to be the second most holy city to the Jews because this is where the cave of the patriarchs, where Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah were all buried. Now notice the early bronze steps in the bottom left photo. It's quite possible that Abraham may have even walked on those steps. Now there's likely to be more evidence of a late Bronze Age city at Hebron, but the Acropolis, the likely site for David's palace, is unexcavated due to this sensitive political situation in that part of the West Bank. Now, King Herod, who was raised in the Jewish religion, built this structure above the caves. Now, stones are very similar to the ones in the Temple of Jerusalem, but it was never destroyed by the Romans and exists today. Now, one member of the Jewish community here at Hebron tells a story in one particular video I saw that he was part of a group back in the 1980s that in the middle of the night broke through the floor stones and found a passageway down to a double cave where they found human bones and pottery and artefacts from the Middle Bronze period. Now, moving on to the Judean wilderness, halfway along the western shore of the Dead Sea, in that ravine there in the aerial photo, is the spring oasis of En-Gedi, with its lush vegetation and living, flowing water, which is a great contrast to the nearby Dead Sea. Now, the Bible paints this contrast between living water that flowed in contrast to the static water that was stored in cisterns. Now, the Holy Spirit, of course, is compared to living water. Now, here's a few more photos at En-Gedi with some of our group enjoying a swim at one of the pools there. Some of the many ibexes that you see in the lake in this area, and also some of the caves. Now, I wonder which one Saul went into that time to relieve himself, where David and his men were hiding. Now, it's here where David had an opportunity to kill Saul, but spared his life. Now, David later then called out to Saul and showed him the corner of his robe to prove to Saul that he didn't wish him any harm. Now, in the photo here, you can see Gabriel telling me that he's cut off my robe, though we want to be careful of that big rock above him. Now, further south near the bottom of the Dead Sea, on its western side, is the great fortress of Masada, built on an isolated rock plateau. Now, Herod the Great built 2 palaces for himself on the mountain and fortified Masada. Now, it's here in 73 AD that we had the mass suicide of the Sicarii rebels who were hiding there from the Romans. Now, to get up there, the Romans had to build a siege ramp, which is that white structure you see there in the centre there. And you can also notice some of the one of these square camps of the Romans. We visited Ain Bokek near the southwest corner of the Dead Sea, which is 430 metres below sea level. It's about 10 times as salty as the ocean, and making it quite impossible for any fish to live in it, as well as making objects quite buoyant in it. Now, there are 2 dates that are usually put forward for by scholars for the Exodus. Now, according to the standard chronology of the Egyptian pharaohs, both of these fall in the middle of the period known as the Late Bronze Age. Now, the Late Bronze Age is the period of time in the ancient world when Egypt's 18th and 19th dynasties ruled. Now, the biblical reasoning for the later 1250 BC date is that the city of Ramses that the Israelites built in Egypt in Exodus 1:11 was the city of Pi-Ramesses that wasn't built until Pharaoh Ramses the Great's reign. However, this date leaves far too little time for all the judges to rule before David, and it ignores a clearer verse in 1 Kings 6:1 as to when the Exodus took place, some 480 years before Solomon began the temple. Now, in a nutshell, there are 2 big problems that most archaeologists have with believing the Bible's account of the Exodus around either 1450 or 1250 BC. Now, the 2 problems that make most archaeologists sceptical that there was even an Exodus to begin with is 1, there is not a single hint of any great catastrophe impacting Egypt during either the 18th or 19th dynasties. In fact, quite the opposite. This is when Egypt is expanding and at its most prosperous. And 2, most of the cities that the Bible tells us were conquered by the Israelites were not occupied during the Late Bronze Age, such as Jericho. Now, most of them were destroyed, however, during the Middle Bronze Age. So we see here a lack of evidence at both ends of the Exodus journey. a lack of destruction in Egypt, and a lack of occupation in the land of Canaan. Now, according to Kenyon, Jericho was unoccupied during the Late Bronze Age, and no wall was found there for that period. Now, this was a great shock to Christian scholars that accepted the standard chronology handed down by archaeology that places it during the Late Bronze Age. Now, following her excavations at Jericho, a massive wave of skepticism about the historical accuracy of the Bible swept through academia. Now, this grew as other sites of Joshua's conquest showed a similar absence. So how then are we to reconcile the archaeology of Jericho and the other cities of the conquest with the biblical account? Now, while Kenyon found no city during the Late Bronze Age, she did, however, find that the earlier Middle Bronze Age period, Jericho was surrounded by a stone wall, which had a second double wall built of mud bricks on top of it. Now, during an earthquake event, the top mud brick wall fell outwards and the city was after that burned by fire. Now, while this is dated much earlier by archaeologists than when the Bible dates it, this is a clear match with the biblical account in Joshua 6. Now, the excavations of Jericho also found storage jars all around the city that were mostly full. Now, this tells us three things. Firstly, it indicates a quick attack, not a long siege, which is unusual given how impressive its double walls were. Second, it was near harvest time, and in Joshua 5, we're told that this was the time of the barley harvest. And thirdly, it was not spoiled by its attackers, which again agrees with the biblical account. Now, while many sincere Christian scholars try to reinterpret the evidence at Jericho and other places and try and connect the Late Bronze Age archaeology with the Exodus and conquest, it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. However, if we look earlier on Egypt's timeline, which a minority scholars feel has been overstretched, then we do find a very comfortable fit between the biblical account and the archaeology. Now, Egypt at the end of the Middle Kingdom had a collapse in civilization, and plagues eerily similar to the Exodus plagues occurred according to the Ipuwer Papyrus. Now, in Canaan, all the cities conquered by the Israelites, including Jericho, had high walls and suffered widespread destruction during the Middle Bronze Age. Now, for those who'd like to know more about the dating issue, I'd recommend this particular documentary, The Patterns of Evidence, Exodus. And now we finally move on to the most southern region of Israel, the Negev. Now, the largest city in the Negev is the city of Beersheba. Now, both Abraham and Isaac dug wells here. Now, there happened to be two wells at Abraham's well in International Visitor Centre in the Old City at the south of modern Beersheba. Now, these wells are perhaps the best candidates for being the wells of Abraham and Isaac. Now, Isaac was living here at Beersheba when Jacob deceived him and then went off to find a wife at Haran. Now, a crazy fun fact is that Jacob was actually 77 years old when he was sent off to go find a wife. So there's still hope for me yet. Now, while we're in Israel, we visited the site of where the famous Aussie Light Horse charge took place during World War I in 1917, which was the turning point of the war over Palestine. Now, the old maps put the Turkish trenches to the southwest of the old city and east of the railway over the Wadi. Now, the main photo here shows the 7 of us Aussies who are from our tour group close to the site of the battle. Arad is situated in the eastern part of Negev. Now, it had two major settlement periods, a Canaanite one and an Israelite period. Now, the Canaanites were the original settlers of Arad, and they established quite a large city before they were defeated by the Israelites after they'd finished their wilderness wanderings. Now, in the top left of the photo is the impressive Israelite fortress that dates mainly to the Iron Age. About 50 kilometres south of Beersheba is Nahal, or the Valley of Zin. Now, Numbers 33 equates the wilderness of Zin with Kadesh Barnea, the place where the Israelites wandered for 38 of their 40 years. Now today the area is very dry and quite arid. And we have a few photos here showing some of the mountain ibexes when I was there, as well as the graves of Ben-Gurion and his wife. He was the first Prime Minister of Israel, and he retired at this kibbutz of Seder Boker that overlooks the valley here. Now even further south is the wilderness of Paran, which the Israelites also travelled through. Now about 30 kilometres north of Eilat on the Red Sea is the area of Timnah, which was rich in copper ore and was mined extensively in antiquity. Now a life-size replica of the biblical tabernacle that God instructed Moses to build has been constructed in the park and is quite a popular tourist attraction. At the very bottom of the Negev is Israel's southernmost city, Eilat, which is a busy port and a popular tourist resort at the northern tip of the Red Sea. Now, Eilat was close to the ancient site of Ezion Geber, where Solomon based some of his ships and through which the Israelites passed by on their way up to Nahal Zin. Now, it was here at Eilat where we completed our tour of Israel and crossed over to Aqaba for our final week exploring Jordan. So that concludes part 2 of this brief overview of the Holy Land. If I get a chance to speak up here again, I'll try and cover Jerusalem and Jordan. So I hope that you've enjoyed this brief flyover Israel and hope that it's helped you to better visualise some of the many events of the Bible that took place here.